so maybe this is a fitting song this morning. It was Christmas in prison. The food was real good. We had turkey and pistols carved out of wood. And I dream of her always, even when I don't dream. Her name's on my tongue, her blood's in my stream. Wait a while, eternity. Oh, Mother Nature's got nothing on me. Come to me, run to me, come to me now. We're rolling, my sweetheart, we're flowing by God. It was Christmas in prison. Food was real good. We had turkey and pistols carved out of wood. And I dream of her always, even when I don't dream. Her name's on my tongue, her blood's in my dream. She reminds me of a chess game with someone I admire, or a picnic in the rain after a prairie fire. Her heart is as big as this whole goddamn jail. She's sweeter than saccharin at a drugstore sale. Wait a while, eternity. Oh, Mother Nature's got nothing on me. Come to me, run to me, come to me now. Rolling, my sweetheart, blowing by God. It was Christmas in prison. The food was real good. We had turkey and pistol carved out of wood. I dream of her always, even when I don't dream. Her name's on my tongue, her blood's in my stream. The searchlight in the big yard swings round with the gun, and spotlights the snowflakes like the dust in the sun. It's Christmas in prison, there'll be music tonight. I'll probably be homesick. I love you. Good night. Okay. Well, that's a little different for a start. Glad to see. Let's see how many of you we've got here this morning. We'll get underway. We got a lot to cover. Let's hope you're having a good holiday season. And let me go to. Let me get the video off here. Okay, it's 10 o'clock, so let's get underway. This last of our 6-session complete management course. You all know me by now, so I don't need to stop here. Today, this is Module 6. We're going to do the permit process, measurement, politics, leadership, and management. So we've got a very full schedule this morning. And we're going to start with the permit process. And let's look at the permit process in cartoon fashion. Can you explain the manufacturing process a little more detail? Can you explain the permitting process in a little bit more detail? Here's a Blondie cartoon to illustrate it. Where do I need to go to see about remodeling my site for a deli and catering operation? First county health, then city health, then consumer affairs and zoning and planning, then licensing. And since you're in a bird sanctuary and historical area, you must see the architectural review and environmental impact boards. Sounds like some of your organizations. What happens when I finally get all those approvals? We don't know. It's never happened. And this is supposed to say, time to straighten out the process. One of the cartoons from our cartoon contest. The development process, permitting process is interesting. Many of you go to planning school. This is not where you view planning being. You want to do the long range planning, which is fine. But in my experience, unless your permitting and development process is pretty much streamlined, working well, you're going to have trouble getting support for the long range planning. So they go together, and that's why I think permitting is pretty important. Reform the permit process. Let me get an arrow going here. Well, often it's for, excuse me while I get my technology straightened out. All right, let's try this. So administrative cost. Often this is very expensive and we want to bring those costs down, and some of the reforms can bring those costs down, particularly automation. Then getting better customer service, answering customer complaints. Communities that economic development and redevelopment, they want a faster process and a cleaner process. And I think that's a worthy goal. We talked about empowering employees in the past, and you can do that in your permit process. Your customers want clarity and consistency, and I think your staff also wants that. Here's what I just talked about, necessary to support long-range planning, reducing timelines. Now, there are other issues that often also get into the act here. One may be just your overall community goals, what you have in your general plan, having a fair and process that meets due process, reducing housing costs. We're seeing that increasingly around the country, reducing public officials' time, and then reducing controversy in the process. So these are all things that could be impacting your development process. Now, you ought to set some civic objectives as you go about this. We believe your development process should be policy neutral. Process should be clear and reasonably predictable. That is, both the developer or property owner and citizens should know what to expect from the process. Should be policy neutral. Should not be used to either speed up or slow down development, depending on attitudes about growth, slow growth, and no growth. Growth issues and direction must be dealt with by the Board of Supervisors adopted as clear public policy. By the way, it's interesting, when I wrote this originally, I was dealing with a no-growth community, and I wrote this to try to clear the air. And the interesting thing, the elected officials actually thought this was a pretty good statement. So it begins to say, elected officials, you want to be no growth, deal with it head on. Don't try to do it through the back door. Then should be policy neutral, should have clarity and predictability. We want to have a public-private partnership. It's not us versus them. We want to be in this together. I like to say that your staff should be problem solving versus just focusing totally on the regulations. And always trying to make the community a better place. And you, of course, have to define that for yourself. To do this, you have to set and monitor timelines. Then there are a lot of ordinance issues. Who makes the decisions Generally, we like to move them to a lower level from the elected officials, planning commission staff. Then a lot of places, what used to be ministerial now discretionary, and there's a movement underway to try to go back and make more of those ministerial. And then to have up-to-date interpretation manuals, and then to look at the true impact of the regulations. Now I'm curious on this one, this interpretation manual. Let's do a little survey and see if everybody's kind of up and at 'em this morning. Here's the survey. Do you have up-to-date interpretation manuals? Let's vote on this. See how many of you. Okay, as you can see on your screen, a few of you do, but most of you do not. And if you're trying to get this clarity in your process, you need to solve this and get those manuals put together. I think we talked a little bit about this the last session. Then, do you need to do it at all? Once adopted, many plans, policies, ordinances seem to take on a life of their own. And we see this very much in some of the older zoning ordinances. What cities have interpretation manuals you would suggest to look at as models? That's a good question, Shannon, and let me research that, and I'll put out an email. Certainly the county that I used in the last set, that manual, I think it had an interpretation section, but I'm certain I can find in my work a couple of samples to show you. But as I said last time, don't overdo this. Don't get too uptight on it. Simply take the interpretation, get it written down, and share it across the department. But it's a good question, and I will try to come up with a couple samples for you. Now, best practices for development. Co-locate all related departments, all related functions. So this would be planning, engineering, building, often fire, sometimes economic development. So let's do another survey. Do you have co-location of all development related functions, yes or no? There may be some interpretation of what do we mean by all of them, but let's say if most of them. So what you can see, 45% say no and 27% yes. But keep in mind, this is really the starting point for best practices. Now, once you get everybody co-located, then you can begin to look at other streamlining aspects. Ideally, the office is on one level, working off a common lobby and intake area. Here's just a rough diagram. And you can begin to see how I view this. Let me get a pen going here. So you have a common lobby here, and then here's your intake counters. Now I'm showing this as separate, engineering, planning, building. Some organizations, and particularly the smaller ones in this webinar, you might have a joint counter where all of these are taken in by the same person with then some backup. Fees are often a separate place at the counter, But increasingly, as technology changes, there's no reason why the intake people can't handle the fee also. These are other functions that are sometimes involved, police, parks, etc., and then fire virtually always. So we got to get fire, engineering, planning, building. Those are the key ones that you want to get into your one-stop center. Now, if you don't have this, the plan director needs to be aggressive to make this happen. Here's a few stories, and I may have shown you some of these. Christopher, I wish there was a mostly button. A good idea next time I do this. Probably a year from now, I'll put in a mostly button. So when I was in San Diego County, my office was a beautiful office building, historic building right down the waterfront. We could go out at lunch for fish and chips. But the county board wanted to have a one-stop center. They had bought an old industrial warehouse, no windows, and it was about 20 minutes out of downtown, and that's where they wanted to put us as a permit center. And I had seen functions they'd put in there before, and they were very substandard. They put in 9-foot drop down ceilings, and I didn't really want to go there. But I got on the architecture selection committee. We got a really good architect to work with us. And this is what ended up. There were 3 or 4 different ceiling heights here. We have about 4 little, this was a big facility. We had over 1,000 square feet. We had several of these little mini parks. These were various and sundry intake counters. But I had to give a lot of blood to make this happen. Now in Palo Alto, they were in a high-rise building, and it was terrible. The wait lines, people would be waiting out at the elevator lobby. They got so long. So they went and created a nice little permit center. This is right downtown. There's windows here to go right out to the main shopping street. And this was integrated, by the way. This is planning, building, engineering. Very nice facility. Here's another one, Santa Clara, city of Santa Clara, which is a high-tech community. Again, these were integrated. They had a nice little curve here, and these were all sit-down stations. Here, they didn't move you. If you ended up here, say you were here, and you started on a planning issue, but then you needed an engineer or a building guy, they came to you. You didn't have to jump seat to seat. And I like that system also. Then you need a manager of that, or coordinator of that one-stop shop. Now that manager may be coordinating people that are not in that manager's department. So you have to work that through with some very specific details, how that's going to work. This is, I showed you this last week, I think. This happened to Calgary, a big organization, 600 employees. But these were all the functions. Here was the director, and they had a clear one-stop co-located department. You need attractive and functional waiting areas and counter areas. You need good plans, policies, handouts, checklists of all development. Now, I'm going to run through a list here of about 40 items, and I'm going to go fairly fast, but I want you to tell me when you want to discuss one, and I'll try to keep my eye on the chat box here. And Amy says, what's preferable, sit down or standing counters? Amy, I think it depends on the function that you're doing. If all you're trying to do is get somebody to take your credit card, or you're going to hand in some plans or pick up some plans, that should be a stand-up kind of function. If it's something it's going to take you 15, 20 minutes to work through a set of plans, that should be a sit-down counter. And also, as you're laying out those counters, keep in mind you need to recognize wheelchair access. So I actually like both, and some of the better centers. I guess the one from San Diego I had, let's back up there a minute, see if I can back up to show you that. These are all sit down. Well, I guess this is sort of stand-up Palo Alto. But here, if you look at this, now these are all stand-up counters along here. But you can see over here, now these, they don't seem to have chairs. Maybe this was an early picture, but these are sit-down counters. So in the San Diego model, we had both. Okay, moving along. I'm going through a list of about 40 items. We need good plans, policies, handout, checklists, all up to date. Ms. Jones, we found this man attempting to fill out the new permit application, and we see those often are overdone. Now you want highly qualified staff at the front counter. I like to say the front counter is not a training ground. I can assure you one of my trained staff is available to assist you with your next project. Cartoon fashion. Keep it light this morning. Okay, here's some more items. Now you want to set and you want to monitor your counter wait times. These are standards. We sometimes use 10 minutes, 15, or 20. Now, the real small organizations we have in this room, none of these are probably too long. For you, you probably need just a few minutes is the expectation of your customer. For larger organizations, we usually use 15. We've used 20 in a few places under duress, but we don't like it. So 15 is sort of a rule of thumb we tend to use. Then you want an electronic permitting system with good ties to the GIS. Talked a little bit about that in the past. Small permits you want to issue right over the counter or over the internet. And that relates to the layout of your office also. By the way, we've had places that have started this, and if somebody comes into the department with the paper version, and San Jose was doing this, they would take the customer to a terminal, and they would sit with the customer to input that as if they were doing it over the internet, to try to encourage everybody to input their plans in that fashion. Then pre-application, most communities are using some form of pre-application, and you need to work that out as to how it fits into your overall process. Then electronic applications and plans submitted by the internet, I guess that goes back here with 7 permitting system. Early notice to stakeholders. Now, when we were dealing with customer service, we flagged the notion that the non-applicants want more time to review, and the way you do that's through early notice. So instead of sticking with this standard that's in your state statute, as soon as you got a permit in the office, there's no reason why you don't go ahead and notice the stakeholders. It gives them more time. Stop me as I go here. You want to talk about some of these. Now, check plans for completeness at intake. This is a major issue we see in a lot of our clients. And those that are accepting incomplete plans think they're doing it in relation to customer service. But in fact, the opposite happens because it takes much longer to process the plans. And then what happens, you get an incomplete set of plans in, they tend to get misplaced or mislaid, and then another piece comes in, you have to find it to get the files back together, and it goes back and forth. And it's a very inefficient system. So our view is you want to have complete plans at intake, and your customers get used to that. use of credit cards, obviously. It's amazing as we put in automation, how much problem some cities are having getting their system set up for credit cards. But obviously you can't do the internet without credit cards. Then you need easy to understand fees based on actual cost. And if you're an enterprise type function, those fees are going to be very critical for you. Full cost recovery for an enterprise type. Then the electronic permitting system. So this monitors everything going through the system. You want a thorough, fast, and a fair process. Now, money back guarantee. This actually came out of Pennsylvania. The head of the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources created a money back guarantee program. And they said if they failed to make a decision by their deadline, they would refund the applicant's permit fee. Then the director of the department would personally deliver the check. And when he did so, he would have his picture taken with both the applicant and the member of the staff who was responsible for the delay. I love that. And I've never seen any other place to do it. But it says, hey, we've got a system. We know what we're doing. And if we don't meet what we say we're going to do, we'll give you your money back. Okay, then we got electronic plan check and file. So it's not enough just to get your plans in through the internet. And we have one of our clients doing it now, but they don't have a really good operating electronic plan check system. And you need to have both really for a good permitting process. Now, most places have some kind of an interdepartment review committee, but they don't have decision power. We want to give those interdepartment review committees decision power. And it's very important who leads that effort. And usually we think it's a high-level person out of the planning department. And you need to make certain people show up. One of our better communities, they review the permits around the table about 12 departments. Fire would say something, and the parks people would say, well, we can't put a hydrant there because there's a tree, and they would work it out right there around the table. Whenever they got to the public works director or the representative from public works or engineering, he always would say the same thing, I'll have to get back to you on that. And that was created a real problem. I went to the director of public works and said, send us somebody for that interdepartment review committee that's got some decision power, because we're trying to negotiate right there on the spot. So that's an ideal system if you can get it working. Then we prefer project managers who handle cradle to grave, and those project managers also have some decision power. So it goes all the way from pre-application or even application to, for complex projects, they would take it in all the way through the C of O, and we want them to be problem solvers. Now that's hard to do. You may have to split into several pieces, but this is very efficient and very good for your customers if you can pull this off. So it looks like this. They're case managers, and we want those to be problem solvers, not just regulators. All right, stick with me. We got a ways to go through this checklist. Then we want performance test processing and plan check. We want weekly reports on how that's going. And we also want some expedited reviews. So for an applicant that really needs to move things along, they can have it expedited. Usually that's use of outside consultants. Then you're setting performance for each piece of the process. And the complex processes almost always cycle through multiple reviews. but we want to cut the time in half each cycle. So if the first time in is 20 days, second time is 10 days, third time is 5 days. I think in measurement here in a minute, I'll show you a couple samples of this. Then we want to meet those performance standards 90% of the time. A few of our clients have used the 95 instead of 90. That's up to you, but this gives you just a little maneuvering room. If you can meet your standards 90% of the time, though, you're doing pretty well. Then you want to track both government and applicant times. Sometimes customers think a project is taking too long. It's because they've taken too long. And a good permitting system will track both your time and the applicant's time, and you can make that data public. Then comprehensive check the first review cycle. What drives your applicant crazy is you tell them what you want, what they need to do. They do it, they come back in, and you review it the second time, and then you add something new to the list. And so you don't want to do this. You want a comprehensive first check review, and the managers need to monitor this, auditing how well that's working in the system. Then you want consultants for overflow plans when performance standards can't be met. Now, you can also use retired staff, you can use overtime, or you can use consultants. But whatever it is, whenever you can't meet your standards, you have to have a process in place. Then some places use a 3-strike rule. If we can't get together between you and the applicant in 3 reviews, then there's a increase in fees. I kind of like that system. Then you want a comprehensive email list of all stakeholders in the community. So you need an email file of every architect, every landscape architect, every engineer, every community group, and you use those to communicate. I think we talked about that early on in customer service. Then you want to have a good website, handouts, forms, staff listings, org charts, all plannings, policies, ordinances, everything on the internet. And most of you have some of this, but we find that these are often out of date or hard to use, but they're very important for your customers. Then you want online permit tracking. The applicant here can look at the files and see how you're progressing on their project. Then at closeout, you want electronic files. So this goes into your records management system. And all those boxes and boxes of paper files that you have, those are going to disappear because you're actually going to go not only to electronic process, but to electronic files. For inspections, you want an interactive voice response system and an internet inspection request systems. Again, those often create lots of problems in telephone, etc. But this is a good internet kind of system. Now, next day inspections. It's amazing how many places we work that are into a 3 or 4 day inspection schedule. But this is very costly to the applicant. The national norm, there are very few national standards, but I would say if there is one, this is one. So having next day inspections, very important. And again, we use consultants. If you're running behind on inspections, you can have standby inspectors also to see that these inspections get made. Then the combination inspectors. Now for residential and small tenant improvements, there's no reason why you can't use a combination inspector. We see communities that are so specialized, they may send 5 or even 6 inspectors to the same site. But for small projects, those should be one inspector, and those are combination inspectors. And they take some special training, but that's, again, a national norm. Then field computers and printers for inspectors. And I say printers because I think it is useful to leave a record on site. Now, the contractor can access the data on the computer, but they can also get this printed paper on site. And there's good equipment. You see it all over the place in the private sector. Then some communities, particularly the bigger communities, have a standing developer advisory committee. But whether it's a special committee or whether it's simply your meeting, you're attending some of the meetings of the industry in your community, you need to make those connections. Then you need some kind of customer feedback and evaluation system. And those would be surveys of the type that we talked about earlier. Then certified engineers, plan checkers, inspectors. I like to include certified planners. I think your key planners should be AICP members. And that can be a little controversial, but I think all the staff should be certified. Then stakeholder education sessions. If you're going to have new sections of your zoning ordinance, new policies, a new building code, you need to have meetings to help educate the community. Then post-construction field reviews of projects read quality issues. And this is a big bugaboo of mine, starting as an architect. We see very few communities where the planners or the building people, well, not so much the building people as the planners, will actually go out after the project is up and say 6 months later and see how everything worked out. So I'd like to encourage all that. And then, of course, all this leads to the paperless office. And that's coming whether you're ready for it or not. Now, your smaller community is going to take you longer to get there, but the costs keep coming down. But you ought to be prepared as you move up into other organizations to get going on the paperless office. Okay, well, that's a lot. That's the permit process. And that'll be in your handout. Just a little checklist. Let's see if anybody looking at the chat box talks about any of those. Let's see, Kevin, can you provide a document that links each of your best practices to model cities departments? I don't know if I can do that with a document. And I don't know if we've got one that's got every single piece tied together, although Calgary is pretty close. Calgary is the one that they've got really heavy electronics keeping stuff together. But let me think about that, Kevin, and see if we can give you we like to think all of our clients, of course, have done that, but it's a big task to get all those together. But that's where you ought to be heading. Help me find enough money in the budget for a scanner. So you're going to scan those old records also. Okay, moving on. Now let's look at measurement. And measurement, not well understood by a lot of planners. Here it is in cartoon fashion, a real problem, these damn charts. What do? You fake your performance measurements? By the way, there are a lot of cities now that have some kind of a internet-based performance data. And when we've been in these communities doing our studies, we'll look at that data and compare that data to what we're finding. And we're finding often that doesn't match. And when we talk to the staff, they wouldn't say they're going to fake that data, but in fact, that's what they're doing. Because nobody's really using it the way it was intended as real performance measures. There's a lot of theory. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. I'm pretty close to that. There's probably some exceptions, but you need to learn how to measure things. And the beauty is with the computer these days, this doesn't have to be labor intensive. You set up systems, a good permitting system does virtually all the measurement uh, for you. Now, when you measure, I actually went through an entire course on measurement, and what they told us is there are just four things. They're always the same four things in a measurement system. So you want to measure quantity, quality, time, and cost. Now, you want to have all of those in your measurement system. However, when you want to increase your quantity and you want it faster and you want it cheaper, the question is what happens here to quality? And it's not unusual as we try to put these systems in place that people feel quality is down. Anybody want to get in on the discussion? What do you think? I probably should have had a test here of some kind. Well, the interesting thing is when you actually put together this system properly, and you can really see this best in the auto industry because their quantities, their time, and their cost, but they got the quality up also. So if you do this right, you can do all of these at the same time, and quality does not have to suffer. So how does the measurement system work? You set up a standard, then you design a measurement system. The standard would be normally time, how long is it taking, but then you design a system, then you compare the actual to the standard, and then you bring performance to the standard. Now, there are cases when you change the standard, when you see the standard you arrived at is not practical, but normally this is what you want to do. You set the standard, design your system, compare it, and then bring performance to the standard. And the reason normally I want these reports coming out of the system on the manager's desk on a weekly basis. In some communities, maybe even daily basis. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to bring you're not going to know you need to intervene to get things up to standard. Although eventually, once set up right, your staff will understand they've only got so many days to get through the process. Now, also, when you're doing your measurement, you want to avoid averages. Well, let's take an example of this. We will see places the statistic will say the average wait time counter was, let's say, 15 minutes. But that average merges too many apples and oranges. So instead of using an average, what we would say is 90% of the customers will be served within 15 minutes. And you get a different standard. I'll show you this I'll illustrate this for you in a few minutes. So let's look at some typical measurements. So our topic we're into here is measurement. Let's start with employee measures. Now, these are various things. Let me get a different symbol going here. Okay, so you could have billable hours. This is how many, you take vacation times and sick leave, everything, how many hours you actually have to work. Then how employees spend their time, you can measure that. You can do an employee satisfaction survey. You can monitor sick leave. You can monitor staff turnover. And you can do employee evaluations. And we've talked a little bit about all of these in this course, but these would be typical employee measures. So as a manager, you can use measurement to handle these kinds of issues. You can do this kind of thing. This was one of our clients. I can't remember which client, but they did an employee satisfaction survey. We do a little bit of this kind of thing also in our studies. So they were comparing 2 different years here. Then office measures. Well, counter remote wait time, we've already talked about that. Telephone service, how many rings, how many hang-ups, that sort of thing. And most of the contemporary telephone systems, you can get reports out of it. Many of our clients we start working with, we ask them to see a telephone report, and they don't even know that the system can provide that data. And then emails, and just go back to the standards we talked about. One of the previous surveys of answering your email the same day they're received. Now, so that's office measures. Then we could go to application measures. So one would be just simply the level of activity. We have some clients, they just don't even have a measure of how many applications by type are coming in each year. So that's where you start. Then the workload factors, we talked about these last seminar or last webinar, I believe. How many hours does it take to do different processes? Then how much employee time is needed, number of staff needed, and this is kind of an interesting thing we picked up along the way. So national surveys, the number of cases per planner. Now this is going to vary a whole lot depending on your community, but it's interesting. These are annual, so this is an annual number. So it goes from 35 to 275 with an average of 130. So you can take a look at what you're doing and get some idea how you're progressing from a national basis. This happens to be, this is out of Calgary. Now their system was so sophisticated. Here's their employees working on these permits. This is the ones that met the standards. These didn't meet it. Number of reviews completed. Here's percentages, number of days to completion. Now, if you're managing this function, wow, having this kind of data available to you on a weekly or monthly basis gives you some real insight into your staff. We're still on application measures, so what's the timeline on each step in the process? How long is the applicant taking to get back to you? Then these are the cycles we talked about. Then this is the overall timeline. Now, even though you can't control the applicant's time, we can still be concerned for the overall time, and we can do some things to try to move the applicant along also. Completeness review, we talked about. Then the second level, the decision times and appeal times, those are important. How's the action on appeals? You can measure all these things. We're talking about measurements. So talking about appeals. How many of our appeals were overturned or withheld? And that can give you some insight into how you're doing and what your codes, whether you need to make some changes to your code. Then triaging of permits. Some places put everything in the same stack. We prefer to separate them out. So those that take a long time are in the stack, then those that work very quickly. And many of those are often over the counter. So we're in this topic of measurement. So these would be typical measures. What percent of administrative permits were reviewed in 5 working days? Minor permits, 30. Now, don't stick with my numbers. These are illustrative. Um, how many had a good review in the first cycle of review? Lost my pointer here. This is a whole new technology system which we're not happy with. Okay, first cycle review. And that's the standard we talked about. So you can measure all of this stuff. This happens to be Henderson County, Nevada. And at the time I pulled this together, this was actually on the internet. I haven't checked lately, but you can sort of see they were one of my clients. So here's a single family review right here. First review, 15 days. Second review, 10. Third review, 5. See it? And they really believe this, so they had this on the internet and at their front counter. So if you come in, you can see here's the same system. And they go through the number of days for each type. I thought it was great. Here's another one of our clients. This happened to be up in Washington. They had a huge backlog. Here's the reviewing functions. And this is where they were in this huge backlog. We worked with them to get it here, get it down to 0. And that took a lot of work. Now, once we got it there, then they started their measurement system. You can see it here. And they did a pretty good job, with the exception of engineering. But the goal was to keep these down, and you can see the difference between this and where they were, all in the measurement system. They also did this for their building permit. They set a baseline, you can see it here, and they said, this is the number of permits our staff can handle under our performance standards. But this is what they were getting in. Now, what did they do? For everything up here, all of this, they had to have standby consultants. And but the fact they had a measurement system allowed them to do that. Now we see this used in a lot of places, just a little color chart. And you can imagine you as the manager, if you could get one of these daily or weekly, all one page color coded. So this says these are on target. This yellow one is, if they had set 95% here. So that was starting to fall below target. You had to begin to pay some attention here. But wow, look at this one. Here's their engineering. And they had to go through a whole new program to bring this one up to standard. But this kind of a measurement chart can be very good. Here's another one that's interesting. This separated. This was the yellow here. This is the city or county's time. And then the darker color is the applicant time. And when you can see these for a project, it begins to tell you why did it take so long to get over here. All different styles of measurement. A lot of this I think is in my ABZ's book. Okay, then for what we're doing here, we've got performance measures, and that leads you to staffing and resources. Now, you can't really do this if you don't know what this is. So you got to set these, and then you can look at staffing resources. And then where does that lead you? It leads you to the fees or the budget. But increasingly it leads you to the fees. So that's kind of closed measurement systems. Now, planning policy measures, output measures. Now, these are much tougher. Some of these are pretty simple, but some of them, to really get into clear measurements for planning, it's more complex. But let's just take a few. So the first one, are your plans and policies up to date? That's the starting point. Now, then, did you do what you said you're going to do? In other words, the city council asked you to do something, they wanted it back in 3 months. Did you meet that target or not? So that's a measurement. You ought to report on that in your annual budget. There it is, a request from city council. Then were the policies here? You've got these up to date, or you're revising them, but were they adopted? Are they operational? And then, do you have an adequate planning budget? Now, even though we spent a lot of time today talking about current planning, you need to stand back, look at your department, and see, are you doing enough planning or not? And if not, you need to sell the planning part of your program. And outcome measures, these are the ones that are tougher to come up with ideas. Here's from one of our clients: 85% of the members of the council and commissions rate the quality of development review as meeting expectations. So this would be a measure of your staff. And then, of course, the customer satisfaction survey of some type, and we've talked about those in the past. Percent of people who believe the community is a good or excellent place to live. We see this kind of measurement being used citywide, and they can give you some insight. We like to set more specific for planning, however, than we often see. Then you move into more complex measurements. Percent of high quality natural habitats protected from development. Well, now when you do a measure like this, there's some tricks here you got to be very careful of. So first of all, you got to agree on what's a natural habitat. Then you got to agree on what's a high quality habitat. And then you got to agree on when are they really protected from development. So this kind of measure is great, but it takes a lot of work. And in sustainable development and global warming and those kinds of things, we're now beginning to see measurements of this type. Carbon emissions would be an example. Physical health of the community. It's interesting how few planning departments seem to really be interested in the economy and the physical health of the community, but there's nothing that says planning should not be involved in economics. Smart growth and sustainability. And these days, those of you that are into these, you probably have some measurement that you're using here. And if you don't, you ought to be designing them. Okay, that was measurement. Let's see, we've run through the permit process and measurement. Give you a lot of stuff to go on. Now we want to talk politics. Almighty Google, why won't City Council follow the planning staff recommendations? Well, that's politics. Obviously, you want your recommendations implemented, and I'll show you that here in a minute. Planning is and must be involved with politicians and political issues. And I want to show you some ideas of how you do that. So these are typical elected officials in my experience. So you got some good ones, you got some bad ones, we got, I guess, ugly, but good or bad in your community. And they are what they are. They're your elected officials. Uh, City council impression of themselves in cartoon fashion. Okay, in my book, I've got 39 items for handling political issues. Today I'm going to cover just 11 of them and maybe can get you to add some more from your experiences. So don't try to change your elected officials. Let's go back to it. Here they are. You're not going to change these. They are your elected officials. And so get over the notion. I always tried, uh, I learned it the hard way here. I always thought I could change my elected officials. Eventually, I understood that that's not possible. And I kind of got off of that kick. So don't try to change them. A better approach is to ask, how can I learn to work better with each of these elected officials? Democracy in action. Each one has a different personality. We did those personality tests in one of the earlier sessions. You can figure out their personality, and that'll help you learn how to work with them. Now, timing may not be everything, but it's close. So we'll often say, don't try to adopt a general plan in the middle of an election cycle. Election cycles are just too loaded, usually, for those kinds of things. So be careful of the timing with your policy things. More sensitivity during elections, as I've seen, that have products and services with high visibility and support. Now, these, you may not feel these are the most important things, but scratching the back of your elected officials. I've seen places where they'll have a report listing vacant industrial sites and may have a picture of elected officials on the cover, that sort of thing. So you want to, and then if you need to get support in the community, again, you may need to pick projects that have high visibility and support, and that helps you build other parts of your program. And be both a leader and a follower. Help articulate the vision of the elected officials and the community. Now, this may require some working with the elected officials to try to help educate them, but you also may need to help them with their vision. We worked with one community, had an outstanding planning director, but probably about 6 months after our study, the director got fired. Now, not because of our study, but what we found was the director only believed in his vision and spent all of his time on his priorities, but did not work on the city council priority. And that's going to get you into trouble pretty fast. Good way of planning to get in trouble is do what the mayor asked, but forget to mention his name. Then do a political analysis. Now, I always thought it'd be great to get your local school or your local college and get one of the management classes to do a political analysis of your community. I wouldn't advertise that, but if you can do that, but if you can't, and particularly if you're going to a new community, you need to do a political analysis, or in your existing community. So you need to know what your elected officials' goals are. You need to know personality, which we've talked about, and then you need to know who the boss interpreter is. Now, what's a boss interpreter? All bosses have interpreters, and those of you in this class that are bosses, you have interpreters also. These are people that understand what the boss wants, and they can be used by you both to understand the boss, but they can be used also to send messages to the boss through the interpreters. So this is all part of a political analysis. And if you haven't done this, you ought to take a few hours after the course someday and maybe even try to do this over lunch with other staff members and see what you can come up with. Again, I wouldn't advertise that you're doing a political analysis, but you need, as a planning director, you need to do this. Then you need to help staff understand the political realities. Now, there are communities that insist that whatever the city manager says or the mayor says, they demand that you do it. I've never agreed to work in that community. If you're willing to do that, then you'll have to work within that system. But that's different than understanding political realities. So when you're pushing something, you need to understand what the votes look like and what the political realities. Now, it doesn't mean you'll suddenly change your recommendation from a no to a yes, but it does mean you recognize what those realities are, and to the extent you can within your ethical standards, make changes to relate to the political realities. That's real hard for a new staff to understand, but those of you that are planning directors, or when you become a planning director, you'll understand that very clearly. Then you want to monitor staff contact to or from elected officials. Now, this varies by community. Some of your communities have a strict policy that there cannot be staff contact from elected officials, only through the city manager. However, in most communities, in my experience, there's always going to be some contact, both ways, staff contacting elected officials or elected official contacting staff directly. In my experience, I didn't feel like I could really stop that. But as the director, I'm head of the political strategy for the department, and I need to know what these contacts are. In my book, I think you'll see a little form I use. Today, we would do it through email. But every time there's contact with elected officials by staff or vice versa, I wanted to know what that was. I wasn't necessarily going to interfere with it, but I needed to know what it was to feed into my strategy. And this political information and political direction, I guess we've really sort of talked about that. It goes with this articulating the vision question. You need the political information, and how you act on it, that's a more tricky decision that varies by community. Number 10, build personal relations. Now, what do I mean? I don't mean here you're playing golf with the elected official. But how do you build personal relations? Well, one is understanding the personality of the elected officials. When I was in San Diego, I noticed that two of the elected officials always came to the meeting early. And as a newcomer, I would observe certain department heads sort of standing around with those elected officials. And what were they doing? They were building a personal relation with those elected officials. So whatever your mechanism is, you need to do that. They need to see you as a person. You need to see them as a person. Well, let me give you an example of this. When I was in Tucson, one of the candidates for city council ran on the platform of firing me, and he got elected. Now, what did I do? Shortly thereafter, when he came to office, I invited him to lunch. And we went to the lunch to a restaurant where all the political types in the community hung out, and you could almost see people in the restaurant looking at us, wondering, well, what's going on there? Is Zucker giving him his resignation, or what's going on? There wasn't anything going on other than building personal relations. And that lunch did a lot to soften the whole thing and begin the process of building personal relations. Then don't stand between elected officials and the camera. Now, I was always very good on, at least I thought I was good on TV and radio interviews. Loved to do it. And I did a lot of it, particularly in Tucson. But what I come to understand later is that didn't serve me very well. And so we want to get the elected officials on the camera rather than us. And you may need to work on that. So these are just 11 starting points, and there are more in my book. um, I was not these were not necessarily my strong card, so I may not be the right person teaching this piece, but these are things that at least I've found of some help to me, and hopefully they will to you. Now I said 11, I added a number 12. Uh, Number 12, get the votes. Now I wouldn't advertise this, but you've got to decide what you're trying to do. If you're satisfied simply producing reports that never get adopted and the community is not changing, then you can do that. But to me, that's not planning. Planning is producing the recommendations and getting them adopted. And that means getting the votes. And go back to these, all of these may relate to how successful you are at getting the votes. When I came up with this one, I thought I was going to get a lot of kickback. But the interesting thing in teaching this course a number of times now, I've never gotten any real negative on that point. So hopefully we've got some agreement there. Well, that's politics. Then let's go on to the last one, leadership and management. And of course, the whole course, to many respects, has been about leadership and management. I like this little cartoon, Evolution of Leadership, for the women in the course. And that's changing. Let's look at the difference between leaders and managers, and there is a difference. So the leader sets the direction. The managers keep the train running on time. The leaders innovate. The managers administer. Authority is earned by the leaders, and the managers, it's vested in the position. Leaders are change agents. Managers less change. Leaders use a lot of intuition. Managers are more analytical. And leaders see the forest, and the managers work in the trees. Now, now this can be a problem for planning directors because in most organizations, you need to be effective. You need to be a leader. You need to have some of these, and you need to be a manager. Now, each you need to examine yourself where your strengths are in these areas. But to be successful, you're going to have to work in both arenas. Now, for a large organization, and let's see, I'd say larger than we have in this course, the approach we're taking these days is we want a planning director and we want an assistant planning director. The planning director normally will have these leadership abilities, and then under the planning director, we want a manager who keeps the train going on time. Now, you could flip these two, obviously, between the manager and the assistant director. But for a big organization, you need both. I've made that mistake in the past, some of my career, but I've come to believe this very strongly. And Business Week recently had an article that said, U.S. businesses now have too many leaders who are detached from the messy process and management, so they don't know what's going on. We should encourage all managers to be leaders, and we should define leadership as management practice well. I kind of like that. Managers must learn to be leaders, and leaders need to be skilled managers. Now, the combined leader and manager has a number of internal and external responsibilities, and we've covered these in various parts of this course. So internally, what do we need to do? We want to set the strategies. There's the mission. There's the northbound train we talked about. Then you got to deal with personnel issues. This is all that hiring and evaluation and firing, and this is the bus analogy we use. Then you got to know how to delegate, and this is the pie analysis we use. The piece of the pie in delegation, that's the management responsibility. Then you need to learn how to empower and motivate your employees. These are all internal things you do. Training your staff, managing the office. We went through a whole bunch of ideas there. Cleaning up the permitting process. We talked a lot about that this morning. Then you need to manage yourself, your calendar, your self-improvement. These are all internal things for both leadership and management. If anybody wants to talk about it, and keep these in mind. We're going to have a few extra minutes at the end here this morning to go back and discuss anything in the entire course. But that's internal. Now let's go external. So you want to listen to the customers. That goes to the second webinar we did, is all that customer material. And we want to listen to the customers. And then we just talked about politics, handle the political issues. Let's talk about two different managers. We have a manager who's very good at the internal management issues, but very poor at the political issues. In my view, I often see those managers getting fired. On the other hand, I see managers very good at political issues, but terrible on the internal management issues, and they seem to hang on to their jobs. So you've got to think these through for yourself. I think you need both, but externally you need to handle the political issues. It's not a sideshow. This is key things you need to do. Then don't be afraid of the big ideas. I look back at my own career. The only big ideas I regret, the only things I regret in my career are the big ideas that I didn't have the ability or desire to bring public. But don't be afraid of those big ideas. And I guess I don't have this in my example in this course. When I was in Marin County, we divided the county into three big pieces. We had urban, rural, or agriculture, and recreation. And that was a big idea, and that stood the test of time in the county, and still kind of is the guts of the county's program. So don't be afraid of the big ideas, and as planners, you ought to be having big ideas. Then constituency building. You need to get support for your planning, and if you have a complaint you're not getting the budget you need for planning, for long-range planning particularly, you may need to do more constituency building. Now, let me show you how that works. When I was planning director in Marin County, I was called into executive session. 5-member board, 3 members asked me to resign. And I didn't want to resign, but I write for a public hearing, and I asked for a public hearing, which they had. Now, here are the people that showed up for public hearing. Now, keep in mind, I was only dealing with unincorporated area, but I did do some work with the cities also. So look at this. Here's city council. Here's a planning commission from the city. Here's another city. These are a bunch of homeowners associations. Here's a AIP Association of University Women. Here's a bunch more homeowners associations. Improvement clubs. Here's the city's Chamber of Commerce and the city council from this city. The more homeowners. Here's a bunch of San Francisco architects. All these people showed up at the hearing. Why did they show up? We had built these as constituencies for good planning. They believed in our program. Now, the beautiful story about this, at the end of the public hearing, I got a 3-2 vote of confidence, so we switched one of the votes. But the only reason it was possible was these constituents came forward. So we've kind of wrapped this up. This is what we've covered today. We tried to show you how important the permit process is. And then I tried to show you how you can use measurement as part of your toolkit for management. And then I tried to show how important is politics. And then you need to think about your leadership skills and your management skills. And just because you're not a director doesn't mean you can't have some leadership, however, within your department. But obviously, as you move up to director, this becomes more critical, and this is more of an internal thing. A lot of course in these 6 sessions. See if there's some things you'd like to talk about. Particularly, I'd like to hear where you differ with more than answering your phone the same day it's received, but whether there's some areas you'd like more clarity on, and we'll just open the chat box. If we've got anybody writing, I'd like to, those of you that are directors, give us an idea of something you use in the political arena that's particularly useful. Okay. Amy, you've already said this, but what's considered a big organization? Number of employees or defined? It's really defined not just by the community's population, it's defined by what's the community's need. So an example would, one of my classes, we had planners from Beverly Hills, California. I couldn't believe the number of planners they had. It was huge. But Beverly Hills was the kind of community that demanded a lot of detailed planning, and they needed those planners. I don't think I said this earlier, but the best department I ever worked for was one person. They had a planning director, and I'll take it back. He had like 20-hour-a-week clerical help. This planner did unbelievable things in the community. He had a downtown revitalization going. He had joint parks with the school system. He had traffic calming devices going in. He brought in millions of dollars of grants. One person, one planner. So I'm really not a big fan of big organizations. So the whole notion of lean organizations, I can buy into. But the reason I like, if you recall, well, let's divide your department into 2 pieces like we did earlier in the course. So you take the permitting development piece, you simply go through the analysis. How many applications are we getting a year? How many staff members do we need to process? And so that sets the size of your department for that side. Then we go into long-range planning side, project side. You recall we listed all of those. How much labor does each one need? And that sets the size of the staff for long-range planning. So it depends very much on the community. But don't get hung up. And I had to hang up as I came up through the ranks, starting with I was mostly a planning director in my career. So I started with maybe 3 or 4 people in my department, then moved up to 10, maybe then to 15 or 20, and then maybe 40 or 50, and then my last job I had over 300. And I sort of thought, I must be getting better and better. I must be getting smarter and smarter. But looking back on it, I think that was a missed view of size of staff. And I'm these days with very small staff that are doing marvelous things in the community. So I don't know if that answers Amy, but just take a close look at your community and then you set this. Okay, Deb, we have a board of elected commissioners who make a decision and then change their minds later. Often they forget the previous conversation. How do you hold them through their decisions? Well, I don't know if I want to hold them through their decisions or not. I mean, I think they're entitled to maybe changing their decisions. I do think you're going to have to remind them of that. You're going to have to show them what the costs are of changing those decisions. And here I would make certain always you get your county administrator, your county manager, whoever you have to join this also, because they should be right in the middle of this. And you may need to check in periodically. I see cases where the commissioners have requested some kind of a study or something, and maybe it's going to take you 5 months. And you come back at the end of 5 months, and the commissioners are like, well, why did you do this? And they had forgotten all about it. And that was no longer high on their agenda. And you spent a lot of time on something of a waste of time. So it's an example where you needed to check in with the commissioners more frequently to make certain you were on track and really doing what they wanted. So reminding them of the previous conversation, I think, useful, but they may change their decisions. In some cases, you want them to change their decisions. So they make from your perspective, a bad decision, and then rather than go with it, they eventually wake up to the fact, hey, that was a bad decision. Let's make a different one. So let's see, Deb. Oh, Deb, you jumped, but I wasn't reading you. I was saying the same thing you're saying, though. It tells you to do something, work on it for 6 months, then they say start over. Well, they may say start over for different reasons. One reason may be that they've changed their mind. One may be that you didn't really get the gist of what they were after. Again, for a long project, I would tend to have more progress reports to them, work sessions. So you don't spend a lot of time on something that's not going to fly. Very good points, Deb and Amy, coming up with here. See if we got something else you want to talk about. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this course. Those of you that were on real early, I did one of my favorite Christmas songs called Christmas in Prison. It's a John Prine song. Forgive me for that. I wasn't trying to equate working in government being in prison, but think about other people during the holiday. I enjoyed it, at least, whether you did or not. I would encourage you all to send us emails, comments on the course, things that you suggest for the future, and particularly critique things or things that you think should be handled differently. And so I've enjoyed it. You'll get the handout again for this session, and hope you have a good holiday. Signing off.